Mic check 1, 2. Good evening, Dr. Marks. Are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Excellent. Thanks.
Will you be presenting or anything?
I will not be.
Okay. Okay, great. Thanks. morning, Commissioner Mitchell. Can you hear us?
Yep, I can hear you just fine, Brian. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Good morning, Commissioner Coleman. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Good morning.
Morning. Thank you.
Coleman, can you hear us?
I can. Good morning, Madam Chair.
Good morning. Good morning, Commissioner Mitchell.
Good morning.
Okay, we have Commissioner Kolkmeyer and I here in person, so it is 11 a.m. and all the commissioners are present. So we will begin the agenda for today, Wednesday, February 25th. I would ask those who are participating on the call to please mute your phone unless you need to speak. Today there are 2 new orders and 1 case discussion item, but before we get to those, we do have minutes to approve from the February 19, 2026 agenda meeting and minutes from the February 19, 2026 public meeting with SPP and MISO. Commissioners, are there any changes or modifications to either of those sets of minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving both sets of minutes, please say aye.
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 Those opposed? By a vote of 4-0, those minutes are approved. The first tariff in order today is in file number OX-2026-0180 in the matter of the petition for rulemaking regarding Commission Rule 20 CSR 4240-10.035, the residential advanced meter or hub meter opt-out. On January 14th, Elizabeth Peterson filed a petition requesting that the Commission reconsider or revise the Commission rule. In particular, Ms. Peterson asked the Commission to change the definition of traditional meter. The Commission has approved the final order of rulemaking for this rule, but the rule will not be in effect until April 30th. Further, the rule incorporates the statutory definition of traditional meter. Ms. Peterson's request to initiate a rulemaking is premature as the rule is not yet in effect, and furthermore, the Commission does not have the authority to modify the statutory definition as Ms. Peterson requests. Thus, the order before us denies the petition for rulemaking. With that, I recommend we approve the order, which is version number 1. Commissioner Coleman.
I support the order.
Commissioner Kolkmeyer.
I support the order.
Commissioner Mitchell.
I'm in support of the order.
All those in favor of approving this order, please say aye.
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 Those opposed? By a vote of 4-0, that order is approved. Second tariff in order on the agenda today is in file number WR-2025-0294 in the matter of a small company rate increase for Raytown Water Company. On August 6th, Raytown Water filed a letter requesting an approximate $1.2 million increase in its water system operating revenues. Raytown Water provides water service to over 6,600 customers in the city of Raytown and a small portion of the city of Independence. Raytown Water's request was filed under the staff-assisted rate case procedure, which is available to small utilities. Staff initiated an audit of the company's books and records, a review of the customer service and general business practices of the company, a review of the existing tariff, and a review of the operation of the company's facilities. Once staff completed its investigation, it provided Raytown Water and OPC with the results and included staff's recommendations for resolution of the Raytown Water request. On February 3rd, Raytown Water and staff filed a disposition agreement that resolved all of the issues in this case. The agreement permits Raytown Water to increase its revenue requirement by $900,000. The disposition agreement requires Raytown Water to provide ongoing information to staff and requires them to complete a water loss study before its next rate case. OPC did not object to this agreement, nor did OPC request a hearing. After reviewing the disposition agreement and staff's audit results, the commission finds the agreement is reasonable and will result in just and reasonable rates. Thus, the order before us approves the disposition agreement and permits the tariffs reflecting the agreement to become effective on March 13th. With that, I recommend we approve the order, which is version number 3. Commissioner Coleman,
I support the order.
Commissioner Kolkmeyer,
I support the order.
Commissioner Mitchell,
I'm in support of the order as well, and would just like to thank the company and staff for their efforts. I do think that the water loss analysis is, critically important for the company, as as much water loss as can be controlled will ultimately reduce the overall cost of production. So I'm in support.
thank you, Commissioner Mitchell. All those in favor of approving this order, please say aye.
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 Those opposed? By a vote of 4-0, that order is approved. Now we are on to other discussion in file number EW-2026-0204 in the matter of the establishment of a collaborative working case dedicated to a statewide MIA feasibility study. Judge Clark.
Thank you, Commissioners. Good morning. As part of stipulation and agreement submitted in Evergy, both Metro and West's, and Ameren's last Missouri Energy Efficiency Investment Act, or MIA cases, a third-party Opinion Dynamics was hired to complete a statewide MIA feasibility study. Now, the study was to provide data to examine the feasibility of a statewide MIA administrative model as opposed to a utility-administered model. And that study, which was completed and filed on February 18th, opened to the working docket EW 2026-0204, where the participants are to decide how to proceed with this information. Now, as part of those stipulation and agreements, the signatories are obliged to provide an agenda presentation to show progress to date, and today is that presentation. Now, this is merely a presentation. There is nothing the Commission must discuss, and there's no need for the Commission to vote on anything in regard to this. With that, I will turn it over to Paul Wasmond of Opinion Dynamics for the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Judge Clark. Welcome, Paul. Come on up.
Thanks for having me.
You can proceed when you're ready.
I got a couple paper copies if you'd like.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thanks, Judge Clark, and members of the Public Service Commission for having us today. I have a couple members of the study team on the line as well that are going to be supporting, but just by way of kind of, further introducing the study, the goal really was to explore the feasibility of moving to more of a centralized demand-side management model as opposed to utility-administered, as Judge Clark said. We looked at a handful of comparison states to tease out lessons learned, pros and cons of moving that direction, lessons learned from their experience moving to a different administrative model from a utility-led model. I'm going to be referring to DSM, demand-side management, just for brevity throughout the rest of the presentation. I'm going to extend. There we go. So there are several parties to this study that I'm not going to read out here, but are listed in the second bullet point. I just want to thank all the collaborative group for participating throughout the study. We initiated work on this in September and really finalized reporting, at least draft reporting, through the end of the year. So it was a quick study, but everybody participated, on the merits, and it was a really valuable process, and we really appreciate everybody engaging throughout the process. One of the first things that we did was identify some of the key policy priorities that were of interest to Missouri DSM stakeholders that we have listed here. I have energy affordability highlighted as that was far and away the biggest policy driver in, looking to move the model to a different administrative structure. Other considerations that, the group of stakeholders were looking to address were streamlining the governance and oversight process and reducing complexity, maintaining appropriate oversight on the part of the commission, but then also, reducing complexity both for, program administrators and customers and trade allies and such. Also expanding customer access and achieving savings goals was, clearly, policy interests, raised by the stakeholder group. So some of the key takeaways from the study to start, as I mentioned, affordability was far and away the largest concern that stakeholders were looking to address through DSM more broadly, but then also, making any kind of change in the MIA framework. I do want to note that, across conversations with stakeholders in the comparison states that we looked at, there was some consensus that there would be a lot of work, likely raising costs in the short term to establish a new model. You're standing up a new administrator, a third party, so that doesn't come without effort and costs associated with that, but there are likely longer term cost reductions when you're looking at the state level, everybody participating at the state level versus, individual utilities administering programs. Another key finding, underlying components of the DSM models really drove outcomes. So this is somewhat unsurprising, but the model itself really didn't drive, the key outcomes that the states cared about. So those individual components, cost recovery mechanisms, the way that evaluation is done, the way that targets are established, those really drove the outcomes that the states cared about, more so than, the model alone. And all that, of course, adds up to an administrative model, but it's worth underlying here. That said, the clear strength of a statewide model is, based on our comparison group, was expanding access and having kind of a consistent offering in terms of DSM programming to a range of customers throughout a state. So, that was clearly the strength of some of the models that we looked at in other states. And then finally, legislative action is not necessarily required to make some of the recommendations or most of the recommendations that we highlighted in the report. The MIA statute as it stands is, allows the commission pretty broad purview to make adjustments to the model structure, the administration, and, make changes to the goals and cost recovery mechanisms, all of that, without moving through, amending legislation or introducing new legislation. So I thought that was worth underscoring. So I just wanted to also introduce a little bit more about the background of the study and kind of the process, so everybody understands, the data collection components. So as I mentioned, we started this in September. It was a pretty quick turnaround to, finalize the work plan, establish those, policy priorities that I shared on the first slide, and then also identify the comparison group of states that we were going to look at for this study. So this was all part of a collaborative process with that DSM stakeholder group that I showed on the first slide. We identified like a laundry list of policy priorities, and then we kind of whittled it down to the list that you saw on the first slide, and that's the same process that we went through with the states here, the comparison states. So we've bucketed these into 3 different groups conveniently, but in reality it's more of a spectrum. There's a lot of nuance and detail that goes into how each of these states administers their programs. But the 3 at the top here, Vermont, Oregon, and Wisconsin, all have, truly a statewide administrative model. So it's a third-party administrator. Most, if not all, of the utilities, the vast majority of the utilities in the state, work together to administer programs through that kind of statewide administrator. The second group of states, Massachusetts, Maryland, and New Jersey, were more of a hybrid model. So some components of a statewide and administrative model, and some, more utility-led. So For example, in Maryland, the low-income program is administered through a state agency, the Community Development Agency, but the rest of the programs are really administered through the traditional utility administered programs. That said, there is a statewide brand in most of those states, or in all those states rather. So from a customer's perspective, you know, they're going to, in Massachusetts, Mass Saves, they understand where they can go to get access to the programs, but then the utilities are actually administering those. South Carolina and Louisiana are the other two states that we had in our comparison group. These are two states that have attempted to move towards a statewide model, but have stalled. This was recent legislation in South Carolina and Louisiana. They made this move through the regulatory process, both attempting to, again, move to a statewide model, but they have not moved forward with actually implementing that model yet. So, data collection tasks that we went through for this study, predominantly interviews from experts in these comparison states. We completed 11 of those with folks that were very familiar with the kind of trajectory of the programs in each of these states. We completed 4 interviews with DSM contractors, so these are implementation contractors that are both working in Missouri and some of these comparison states and other states, but very familiar with the the nuance of administering demand-side management programs. And then we also conducted what we're calling preference interviews with the list of stakeholders that were on the first slide. We completed 9 of those, and that was really to kind of gauge initial reactions to some of the early findings that we came up with through this study, and make sure that we understand the challenges and the drivers of an eventual decision to move forward with a different model in Missouri. And then also secondary data collection across the board to supplement our primary data collection as well. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague from ACEEE, Anna Johnson, who's on the line to take the next couple slides here. Anna, do you want to take it away?
Great, thank you, Paul. And everyone can hear me okay, I hope? Yes, I see some nods, that's a good sign. Okay, so as Paul mentioned, we looked across these 8 focal states to gain an understanding of the rationale and reasoning for why they shifted administrative models, as well as the process through which that occurred. So this figure really is talking through a little more of the process that each state went through to arrive at their ultimate or current administrative model. And what we found is that the states we surveyed really took quite varying legislative and regulatory approaches. And one of the things that arose was that the governance and oversight pathway, so the way that they got to their current administrative model, was not really correlated to the ultimate administrative model outcome. So that is, there is not one clear, consistent legislative or regulatory strategy that was used to move from a utility administered program to a statewide administered model. And we note in our research, and this came up through many of our interviews again and again, that it was really a story more about the unique political and regulatory culture within each state that was likely the most important driver of the legislative or regulatory process that occurred to make that shift. However, that said, of the 8 focal states we looked at, 7 did use legislation to catalyze a change in administrative structure. This legislative approach itself varied quite substantially across these states, mostly in the degree of flexibility that was allowed to regulators in determining how energy efficiency programs were to be administered. So this figure shows kind of along a timeline. On the left-hand side, what you see are states that took a legislative strategy that provided greater regulatory flexibility. And to the right of the timeline, you see states that were taking a more legislatively specific approach to shifting their models. So for example, some legislation was quite prescriptive on that right side and required regulators to begin proceedings to change administrative models. For example, in Wisconsin or New Jersey, they were quite prescriptive in what had to happen next. Whereas other states were much more flexible, such as in Vermont, which today is a statewide model, but they only use legislation to broaden the purview of regulators and indicate that they were allowed to consider a statewide delivery model if they found it in the best interest of the public. And as Paul noted, we find through our research that likely the existing NEA legislation in Missouri does not preclude regulators from considering a statewide delivery model today if they thought it aligned with the best interests of Missouri customers. And also you'll notice Paul called out as well, the only state that pursued an entirely regulatory strategy without legislation was Louisiana, which engaged in developing a statewide administrative strategy through regulatory dockets over the last approximate decade. You can go to the next slide, please, Paul. One thing we also noted is that the shift in demand side management model tended to coincide with changes in the broader political environment. This model shift was usually undergone in concert with broader shifts in the political environment and also changing energy policy goals. So this timeline kind of arrays when those shifts took place in the focal states we looked at. Some of the earliest statewide models were established during the electricity market deregulation period in Vermont and Oregon are two good examples of that. In the mid-2000s, what we saw was concerns about the need to expand energy efficiency programs to combat rate increases and also to align better the utility actions with state-level energy savings goals. And this pushed states like Maryland and Massachusetts to shift to a more hybrid delivery model. And then some states also shifted administrative models to avoid efficiency budget conflicts with state agencies, shifting utility programs either back to the utilities themselves, as in New Jersey, or to third-party administrators, as occurred in Wisconsin. And we'll note, and you probably are aware, we are going through another one of those large energy policy changes now. As energy affordability and meeting the challenge of load growth surface across the country, many states are again beginning to explore different administrative models for demand side management as one potential strategy for more effectively deploying these resources to meet the moment. This includes the recent changes in Louisiana and South Carolina, and also interest in exploring a statewide model in states like Maryland, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and as well, of course, as Missouri. You can go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned previously, concerns around energy affordability are quite central to energy policy conversations across the country, no less so in Missouri. And states are considering a statewide administrative structure as one approach to ensuring that utility efficiency and demand responses programs are able to deliver high enough levels of energy and capacity savings. This figure demonstrates through some data collected both by ACEEE and through Lazard that energy efficiency is consistently the least cost resource when compared to other investments in energy supply. So this figure combines standard assessments of the levelized cost of supply side resources along with the average cost of utility energy efficiency savings. This data that in the green bar at the top was taken from 50 of the largest utilities in the US as analyzed by ACEEE. And what we found is that on average, utility energy efficiency costs approximately $21 per megawatt hour, which is less than half the cost of, for example, a megawatt hour of energy from a gas combined cycle plant, and also puts it in robust competition with the least cost supply resources. We also found that utility demand side management programs can also deliver more cost effective capacity savings than supply side resources. So demand side load flexibility programs are able to deliver approximately $45 per kilowatt year capacity savings, which again compares quite favorably to the least cost supply resources, which are ranging from around 52 to 86 kilowatt hours per year. I'll also note that demand side measures are often quicker to implement than building new generation. So given the uncertainty today in many of our load growth forecasts, they can also offer a hedge against the risk of overbuilding infrastructure. Next slide, please. And then to further build on previous comments about load growth, what we see is that there really is some potential to cost effectively address much of the expected load growth in the state of Missouri in the coming years, potentially through the enhanced procurement of demand side resources. So SPP and MISO are predicting load growth ranging from approximately 10 to 20% over the coming decade. And this is likely driven primarily by data centers as well as electric vehicle market growth. So this figure here shares a recent study conducted by EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute, that documented the realizable potential for energy efficiency savings in states across the country. And what you see is that they predict for Missouri that you could potentially procure approximately 6% savings for energy efficiency. This amount could mitigate as much as half of the expected demand growth in Missouri. Through least cost demand side resources if utility programs are able to scale to meet this need. Okay, I'll pass it back to you now, Paul, I think, for the next slide.
Thanks, Anna. So we're going to go through a couple of the key findings here. This is a snapshot. The report is pretty long, but wanted to highlight a couple of key findings for this audience. So the first one we've touched on a little bit. Model shifts tended to align with broader policy concerns, a shift in the political environment, whether it be state or nationally. Anna kind of underscored this in the timeline slide that she presented earlier. But legislative mandates, regulatory priorities, state energy goals, all these served as catalysts that we found in the comparison states for moving to an alternative DSM administrative structure. Legislation worked well to catalyze some of these changes when they coincided with policy goals and really, brought in a broad group of stakeholders, that were all in alignment on what the directive was, and what the goal was to solve through a change in administrative structure. Some examples that we heard from comparison states of why they decided to move to a different structure, challenges with the current administrator, lack of clear savings or spending targets, more streamlined regulatory process, all were, reasons that states had explored a different, model, in addition to, and again, that broader political context that was happening in the country or in those states, at the time of the shift. So another finding that we wanted to dive a little bit deeper into was related to the DSM model structure and cost efficiency. So again, the model alone, we did not see clear trends in a specific type of model structure driving cost efficiency. Some experts noted that there's likely longer-term savings and cost efficiencies, again, when you're looking at the whole state, being able to deliver commensurate program services to customers across the state. Obviously, smaller utilities might not have the bandwidth or the resources that larger utilities do, and so this is kind of a way to bring level the playing field, as it were, and reduce the cost for everybody. If you're looking to expand access across a state, I will say that evaluating the cost efficiency was pretty difficult. If you look at the timeline again in one of Anna's slides, we're talking about shifts that happened 20 plus years ago. Obviously, we're in a different time now. The programs themselves are different. There's different technology being offered. So it's really difficult to kind of, compare costs pre and post immediately, that change, because it wouldn't be relevant today. And then also, if we're looking to compare costs between now and 20 plus years ago, the comparison just wouldn't hold up. So this is qualitative research. We're asking these DSM experts in these other states to comment on what they had seen throughout the trajectory of these programs operating. And so I think that's worth staying. The other clear benefits, again, highlighted by these DSM experts were, improved consistency, customer access to programs. We don't have it explicitly called out here, but, trade professionals or contractor access. Practically speaking, if a contractor wants to be part of a trade ally program in one utility service territory, in a utility-run model, they would have to participate in that utility's trade ally program and then also participate in another trade ally program. They might have different requirements. And so this really streamlined access from both customers and trade ally perspective, and again, improve the consistency of services across the different customers throughout a state. I mentioned a likely increase in administrative costs in the short term. You could understand there'd be significant investment needed to establish a new third-party administrator, a new governance structure, data sharing agreements, harmonizing program designs. There's a laundry list of details that you'd have to really interrogate to move to a different structure. So thought it was worth highlighting that. But then again, DSM experts highlighted the potential for longer-term savings at the state level and more equitable costs across utilities of different customer bases. So one of the ways that we wanted to showcase administrative costs is through looking at non-incentive spending in those statewide states that were included in the study, Oregon, Vermont, and Wisconsin, compared to some of the largest utilities, electric utilities in Missouri. So this is data from an Energy Information Administration report where they compile data every 3 years about non-incentive spending as a percentage of the total budget for DSM programs. As you can see, Missouri, large electric utilities in Missouri tend to be lower in terms of non-incentive spending than statewide models in those 3 states that we looked at. I think it's also worth saying that Vermont, Oregon, and Wisconsin, based on our interviews, administrative cost savings were not necessarily a goal of those states. It really was to expand access, to DSM program across their state. It wasn't an explicitly policy goal to reduce costs, but nevertheless, you see the results here. Slightly lower costs for Missouri utilities in comparison. Another key finding that we wanted to go a little bit deeper on are some of the supporting components of the DSM models that drive results. So again, the model in and of itself didn't necessarily, or there wasn't a clear trend, I should say, in driving outcomes based on the model, itself. But there's all sorts of different policy mechanisms that we highlight in the report that could drive results, in terms of improving consistency, improving collaboration, reducing complexity in terms of governance and oversight, and then establishing targets and goals at the state level also really drove results in these different states. So in terms of the improving collaboration, DSM experts reported that planning, evaluation, clear protocols, cost recovery mechanisms, all of these processes really helped improve consistency, regardless of where on the spectrum the state was, from a statewide to more of a utility administered or hybrid model. And then in addition, all the states that we looked at, with the exception of South Carolina and Louisiana, had centralized legislative savings investment targets. So energy efficiency resource standards are the way that they're referred to, and this really drove results in the states that we looked at. In states that did not have these targets, there was a pretty high variability reported by experts in terms of utility investment and ambition to achieve deeper savings through their DSM programming. So this is just a snapshot of those energy efficiency resource standards, electric and gas, across our comparison states. As I mentioned, Louisiana and South Carolina do not have those targets, but the other states you see here range between a little bit under 1% to over 2%. I think it's worth noting, just to kind of benchmark, Missouri's large electric utilities, Ameren and Evergy, tend to either target or achieve 1% or a little bit lower than that over the last program cycle. So these are in the range of what Missouri's electric utilities are already achieving or aim to achieve through their programs. Another thing that came up through our interviews was the value in having an active and well-structured collaborative group. So in all the comparison states, or many of the comparison states that we looked at that had some success, having a clearly defined stakeholder group with balanced membership, a clear remit in terms of what they were responsible for, really improved collaboration across stakeholders, and having a dedicated facilitator was another finding that came up. So in a lot of cases, obviously the buck stops with the Public Service Commission or Public Utility Commission, and having that group have control or the authority or the requirement to convene a stakeholder group and facilitate that group, it can be tricky. I mean, staff have lots of other responsibilities and a final decision-making authority, and so it becomes difficult to have to play an impartial facilitator role in a group like this. So we found that was another key finding across the comparison states. And then finally, reimbursing participants for their time, particularly ratepayer advocates, public housing representatives. We found that at least DSM stakeholders reported that having a broad range of expertise at the table in terms of these collaborative groups was really valuable. And in a lot of cases, making space and compensating those stakeholders for their time helped bring them to the table and make participation possible in a stakeholder group like this. We understand that there may be some legal limitations in what's possible in Missouri, but that is also a finding that we wanted to highlight. So I'll just wrap up with a couple recommendations, and happy to take any questions. But based on these findings, we obviously went through this process from September through December, identifying policy priorities and challenges that a shift would aim to address in Missouri. We thought it was worth recommending that, to expand the group of stakeholders that were engaged, legislators, electric co-ops, municipal utilities, just to either validate or highlight, the policy priorities. Again, we saw more success in states where they, brought in a broad group of stakeholders and really catalyzed those policy priorities. We saw more movement forward in terms of moving to a different model or having success executing a different model. Exploring further consolidation of program delivery using the existing model. We understand that this is, these are steps that Missouri is already taking in terms of evaluation. There's already co-delivery of different programs. This approach may reduce some administrative costs, maybe yield some administrative savings in the short term, and it wouldn't require, a sea change in terms of an administrative model. So these are different approaches that you could take in the near term to, yield some administrative cost savings. There would be, enhanced coordination required, more alignment in program designs, those sorts of things, harmonizing savings assumptions, but, worth exploring further consolidation there. Another recommendation that came out of this, consider establishing a statewide framework for common DSM metrics such as an energy efficiency resource standards. At the state level, again, we found that this really drove results for the states that we looked at and really allowed program administrators to plan effectively and have a little bit more consistent offerings across different utilities. Even in the event of utility administered or hybrid program model. We also wanted to highlight the collaborative group. So you already have a stakeholder group, Missouri Energy Efficiency Advisory Collaborative, that was established through a regulatory process. So consider updating membership and it was essentially the group that we worked with for this study, and it worked really well. So this could help kind of enhance collaboration as you move towards more, either centralized administrative models or, moving towards, consolidating some of those program activities that I mentioned earlier. And again, consider establishing a mechanism to provide financial reimbursement to encourage participation from, representatives of different customer bases, so you can ensure broad expertise on that stakeholder group. We heard that there's been some success with a low-income working group under the MEAC group. So when you give them a clear remit and goal, they tend to work really well. And so this, we would recommend reinvigorating that group as well. So that's all I had, unless anybody has questions.
Appreciate that, Paul, and thank you, Anna, for helping us through those few slides. Are there questions from the commission?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Commissioner Coleman.
I have a question regarding the last slide regarding the financial reimbursement. So where you've seen those reimbursements, what is that reimbursement looking like? What has those entities paid to those low-income communities or public housing? I like that idea, but how do you envision that? How do we pull it? How do we pull it? And how do we make it fair?
That's a good question. I imagine the answer is going to be different, for Missouri than it is for some of the states that we looked at. I think the main impetus was these collaborative meetings take time, and you want to ensure broad representation when you're administering or designing programs that serve different customer bases. You want to make sure that those customer bases are represented and there's expertise at the table when you're designing, approving, evaluating these programs. So I don't know that I have a clear answer for you on what that looks like. Again, I understand that there might be some legal issues with using public funds to reimburse,
Right.
ratepayer advocates or public housing advocates. But it really is just compensating for the meeting time. It could also be, ensuring that the meeting times for a stakeholder group work with their regular work schedule, because a lot of those folks representing those customer bases have different responsibilities, different day jobs. So maybe it's not financial reimbursement per se, but maybe it's just being aware that the timing and the meeting schedules and what the charge is for those groups. So I think there's a number of ways that states have gotten around this, but I don't know if that answers your question at all or kind of skirts
That
around.
helps.
Yeah.
That helps. I also appreciated the suggestion of enlarging the stakeholder group, particularly when it comes to electric co-ops. Not sure we want legislators to be a part of that stakeholder group, but I'm biased when it comes to that. But I do appreciate that suggestion. So thank you, and thanks for the presentation.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And just to clarify, maybe not necessarily enlarging it, maybe that happens as a result of more utilities wanting to opt into something like this. It's more about kind of reinvigorating the group that you already have. I think there's maybe biannual meetings or something like that. So setting up a meeting cadence, making sure that there's a clear remit for that group. And then, as you said, Commissioner, making sure that the right people are at the table.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Coleman. Commissioner Kolkmeyer?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. Were there any Midwest states to be surveyed?
We did consider Midwest states. The sample pool of states that had moved towards a statewide administrative model is not large. So we did consider Indiana briefly, and Illinois does a lot of DSM, but they're not really a statewide administrative model. So we considered a couple. Wisconsin's on the list.
Yeah, I was kind of disappointed that there were no mid-states
Yep.
surveyed here. Vermont, Oregon, Wisconsin, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, South Carolina, and Louisiana, I don't think align with the Midwest.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a fair criticism. Again, we were looking at states that had moved to a different administrative model, and so that, by virtue of what we're looking at, kind of narrows the scope of the states that we could look at. I think it's important to note that what works in Vermont certainly doesn't work in Missouri, right? It's a different utility base, it's a different customer base, so appreciate that.
Well, Vermont or Oregon, are not aligned with the Midwest states at all. The other thing, energy affordability, your slide on that, I don't have a number on that, but the anticipated load growth of 10 to 20%, I saw a number this morning, possibly in the 30 to 35% increase in data centers. And I think we need to look at the co-ops and the munis, because these data centers are being placed everywhere, not just in the IOU areas. So this was between 2023 and 2025 to get your number of 10 to 20%. Energy affordability. That one, yes, the one with the map. And then down here, you're showing 6% savings, but here to get that number, you're going out to 2040. So you've added 5 years to this number to get your 6%. So I don't think we're comparing apples to apples if we're using a 35 up here in load growth and then a 40 to get your 6%. So if you compare the apples to apples, we're probably spending a lot of money and not getting the efficiency that we need.
Yeah, I mean, that's also a fair criticism. I don't know, Anna, if you want to jump in here. This was an EPRI study that, we pulled on just to illustrate the point that, there is a lot of load growth that could be mitigated through demand-side management. So the numbers are likely imprecise going out that far. I think that you're right to underscore that. But the point is that there is, savings to be had out there, and you could mitigate some of the load growth through demand-side management.
The only other comment I have is there have been a tremendous amount of fraud in the federal program with this. Money coming to the states and it being squandered off and not spent and given to the low-income people that it really needs to go to, and tackling that in. So that's all I have. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Kolkmeyer. Further questions from the commission?
I've got just a couple, if that's okay.
Please.
Paul and Anna, thank you for your presentations. There's a lot to unpack there. And I think my key takeaway is that states that have done this did it for a broad variety of reasons and to achieve, a huge variety of, policy goals and intended outcomes. So I think what I'm taking away is that, if Missouri were to move forward with consolidating a program, we would first want to define what those overarching policy goals and intended outcomes were. And that's really not a question. I guess that's just a takeaway from it. But my question is, within the states that have done this, were you able to uncover insights or indicators that they were actually more efficient at meeting their policy objectives or intended outcomes with a centralized program versus a traditional program?
Yeah, I mean, again, Vermont as an example, maybe not a great example for Missouri, but if you look at the range of small electric utilities, there, they were having real issues meeting, the demand for DSM program services across the range of customer bases. And so when it came to access and kind of leveling the playing field for all those small utilities banding together, produced a much better outcome for them. And again, their goal was expanding access, deeper savings. The same is true of Oregon. So I think to your first question, yes, it would be, our recommendation would be that it would make sense to kind of catalyze around what the policy goals would be. And then you have, kind of a laundry list of different policy mechanisms that you could employ, statewide model, hybrid, something in between, where you could, tailor your targets and cost recovery mechanisms, all those details to achieve your goals. So broadly, yes, we saw that, these states had moved towards this model and achieved the outcomes that they cared about. As Anna mentioned, some of the states that we looked at, and others that were not in our comparison group, are looking to make a change now to kind of coincide with the broader conversation about load growth and affordability. Massachusetts, Maryland, New Hampshire, I think were some examples of even shifting their model further. So, we have that slide which says, this is the time where they shifted and this is what the shift was, but in reality, there's always changes going on, and at least in the comparison states, to kind of tweak the models, tweak the goals to achieve the policy outcomes that each of the states cared about.
And I want to ask too, the states that implemented, did they implement throughout all of the utilities in the states, or were they really limited to the regulated utilities? And how did they address that?
Yeah, there was a range of approaches. in a lot of the states that we looked at, there was opt-in provisions for some of the smaller municipal electric co-op utilities that are non-regulated, to make progress towards achieving a centralized model or making progress to making a change to the model that they had, while also considering, utilities that are not regulated and their ability to opt in. I think Vermont, you can help me out here, Anna, but I believe Vermont had an opt-in provision, and basically all except for maybe 2 utilities in Vermont had chose to opt in to, take advantage of the savings that would come from banding together and having a statewide model. There's other states that did mandate that all utilities participate, but obviously that's would only, be relevant to the regulated utilities. Anna, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I can jump in. So Paul, many of the states, what they did was they first started with the already regulated utilities, and as the model got off the ground, it was seen that there was benefit from the other utilities to joining, and so they built on additional provisions. I think Oregon's a good example where they slowly added in additional gas utilities, and Vermont, as Paul mentioned, also the almost all, but I think 2 utilities or co-ops and munis joined as well. So we do see that even if the plan is to expand to utilities beyond the regulated utilities, that can be done kind of in a stepwise manner, especially once that central administrator is established. Would it be all right if I also made a comment about the load growth questions earlier? I just wanted to add that we do recognize that there's a lot of uncertainty in the load growth forecasts, both for within Missouri and elsewhere. But one of the things we wanted to make a point about is that despite that uncertainty in growth forecasts, we do know pretty consistently that energy efficiency tends to be the lower cost resource, and it can certainly buy time up front for utilities and the commission to sort of determine the appropriate infrastructure build out plan by offsetting some of the initial load growth pressures. So when states that can consistently procure some higher level of savings can potentially have a little more time bought to watch those load growth forecasts rewrite themselves over time.
Sure. And I think it's worthwhile to restate from the commission's standpoint is, the catalyst that brought this question forward was our needing to uncover whether or not our customers were achieving the highest benefit cost ratio they could from our MIA programs. And so I thank the OPC and staff for bringing this forward. I think it's something that we should continue to look at and continue to explore because there might be benefits to our customers that we've yet to uncover.
Thank you, Commissioner Mitchell. Any other commission questions? I do actually have a question. The energy savings that are currently achieved by our utilities, you mentioned were around 1% or less as compared to the comparison states. You estimated that our utilities would be able to achieve about 6 gigawatts of savings by 2040. What percent of energy savings has to occur on an annual basis in order to get the 6%?
It's a good question. I think that this is a little bit of an apples to oranges comparison. The 6% number came from that EPRI study of achievable potential based on the technology in homes and businesses throughout the state. So I don't have a great answer for you on what the annual savings that would have to be achieved to reach that 6% would be.
That's okay. One of the things that we really are focused on here at the commission, and many commissions are really focused on, is affordability, as highlighted here. But these savings also come at a cost. So I was curious, in order to get close to the 6%, if you had done any estimation of costs that would have to go in from ratepayers in order to achieve that 6% savings.
Again, that wasn't our potential study, so I don't know exactly what the cost would be. If we look at the cost in comparison to supply-side resources, they tend to be cheaper to, reduce demand. At least that's what, ACEEE and we had found over years of study. So I think by comparison, the cost would be less than adding supply. So we don't mean to suggest that everything could be achieved through demand-side management. I think this has to be, likely an all-of-the-above strategy. But we're presenting this as an option to kind of achieve some of that load growth through a lower cost.
I think it is
Yeah.
kind of hard. Oh, sorry.
If you don't mind, I was just going
Please.
to add that the figure that we provided on the slide with the sort of levelized cost of energy does find that consistently utilities are able to deliver $21 per megawatt hour on average of efficiency savings, which does put it at the lowest cost resource compared to other supply side resources. So extrapolating from that, one could assume that procuring more efficiency would be cost effective and favorable to ratepayers compared to building more generation if you're trading off between those two. And we know also that the cost of generation is going up, particularly around gas combined cycle parts where the price continues to rise, whereas efficiency is likely not to be impacted quite as much.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Anna. Any other questions or follow-up from the commission? Hearing none. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Anna. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question, commissioners. The last item on the agenda today is scheduling. On all of the future days that I'm going to read, we have agenda at 11 a.m. So we have agenda at 11 a.m. on Thursday, March 5th, Wednesday, March 11th, Wednesday, March 18th, and Wednesday, March 25th. Commissioners, do you have any changes or modifications to that schedule? Okay, and then I have one other announcement that'll be coming soon. We have a save the date for our annual Power Mo conference of October 22nd. That's a Thursday. So for folks, registration is not live. It will not be live until the summer, but just want to make sure folks have that date on their calendars ahead of time so we don't schedule over it and all of our stakeholders can kind of know that that's our plan for that particular day. Any other business coming before the commission? Hearing none. Thanks, everyone. We are adjourned.
Thank you, Madam
Thank you.
Chair.
Thank you. Thank you.